It's Mother's Day, and my kitchen smells of weak coffee and canned soup. This is Albuquerque, New Mexico, a quiet desert edge where time walks slowly. I'm Evelyn Carter, 67, a widow who now counts pills instead of paychecks. Today, my son brings flowers, sits down, and asks about the $5,000. He says his wife always brings it. My lips smile, but my heart quietly disagrees. If you're hearing this story, tell me in the comments. Before we begin today's story, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. Now let's get started. The desert wind carried dust through the screen door of the small stucco house. Evelyn Carter stood at her kitchen sink, watching tumbleweeds roll past her neighbor's fence. The clock above the stove ticked toward noon. Mother's Day afternoon in Albuquerque felt quieter than most Sundays. She dried her hands on a faded dish towel. The ceiling fans hummed overhead, stirring warm air that smelled of canned soup and old coffee. Two mismatched chairs sat at a wobbly kitchen table. Church donation boxes lined the counter, filled with crackers and beans from last week's food distribution. Evelyn walked to the living room mantel. She straightened a photograph of her son Michael in cap and gown. Graduation day 15 years ago. His smile looked confident then, full of promises about the future they would share. "He's busy," she whispered to the empty room. "That's good." Her voice sounded like she was convincing herself. Not anyone else. Outside, gravel crunched in the driveway. A black Tesla rolled to a stop, its paint gleaming against the desert dust. The engine made no sound. Evelyn had never heard a car so quiet. Michael stepped out in a tailored navy suit. His phone was pressed to his ear. A bright supermarket bouquet hung from his other hand, cellophane crackling in the breeze. At the front door, he kissed her cheek without looking up. His cologne filled the tiny hallway. It was a smell of money and downtown offices Evelyn had never seen. "Hey, Mom. Happy Mother's Day." His tone was distracted, professional, like he was checking an item off a list. They sat at her kitchen table between a chipped sugar jar and a stack of medical bills from her last blood pressure scare. Evelyn poured coffee into mismatched cups. The good china had been sold years ago after her husband's funeral expenses. "Sorry, I don't have any real cream," she said quietly. Michael barely heard her. His fingers moved across his phone screen. Numbers and messages scrolled past faster than she could follow. He looked up suddenly. A smile crossed his face, the practiced kind he probably used in business meetings. "Mom, Vanessa still brings you the $5,000 every month, right?" His voice carried casual concern. "Just making sure you're comfortable." His eyes never fully met hers. A notification chimed on his phone. He glanced down immediately. Time stopped. $5,000? Evelyn felt her heart pound so loud she could hear it over the refrigerator motor. For 8 months she had stretched coupons like prayer cards. She had counted pills to make them last longer. She had quietly skipped dinners when the church food box ran low. "5,000?" she repeated slowly. The front door opened again. Footsteps clicked across the tile floor. Designer sneakers, light and quick. Vanessa strode into the kitchen like she owned every room she entered. Her hair was influencer perfect, styled in waves that cost more than Evelyn's monthly electric bill. Her phone was already pointed at herself, recording a story for social media. "Mother Evelyn, you're and she laughed. The sound was bright and sharp. "Did you forget again?" Vanessa patted Evelyn's hand with fingers that sparkled with rings. Her nails were painted the color of expensive wine. "You're mixing things up again." "That's okay." Her tone was sweet, patient, like talking to a confused child. "We've been helping you so much. You just don't remember." The words stung like a slap, but they were wrapped in concern, delivered with a smile that looked genuine from a distance. Michael nodded along. His relief was visible. The conversation was familiar to him, expected. "See? Vanessa takes great care of you," he said. "I knew I could count on her." Evelyn looked around her own kitchen, at the empty cupboards, at the stack of unpaid bills, at the canned soup that would be her dinner again tonight. Something cold settled in her stomach. It wasn't confusion. It was clarity. That night, under a dim bedside lamp that flickered when the wind blew, Evelyn opened an old spiral notebook. It was left over from her library days when she tracked book orders and overdue notices. Every page had been filled with careful handwriting, neat columns of numbers that always added up correctly. She turned to a fresh section. Her hand trembled as she picked up a pen, but the letters came out straight and clear. "If I'm old," she wrote slowly, "then let age write the truth." The words looked small on the wide page, but they felt larger than the house around her, larger than the desert outside her window. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. Evelyn kept writing. The next morning, Evelyn dressed in her best church blouse, the one with only one missing button, hidden under her cardigan. She pinned her gray hair back with bobby pins that caught the light from her bedroom window. The bus ride into downtown Albuquerque felt longer than she remembered. The city moved faster than her library days. Cars honked at red lights. People walked past bus stops without looking up from their phones. She clutched her worn leather purse against her chest. Inside was her bank passbook, the kind most people didn't use anymore. Its pages were filled with her careful handwriting. Every deposit, every withdrawal. Numbers that told the story of a careful life. The First National Bank stood on Central Avenue, its glass doors reflecting the morning sun. Evelyn had banked here for 37 years. The tellers used to know her name. Now they were all younger than her son. She waited in line behind customers, tapping screens and checking messages. A young mother bounced a crying baby. A businessman spoke loudly into his phone about quarterly reports. Everyone seemed to be in a hurry to be somewhere else. When her turn came, Evelyn approached the counter slowly. The teller was a polite young woman with bright lipstick and tired eyes. "Could you please check my deposits?" Evelyn asked. Her voice was quieter than she intended. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I need to see what came into my account." The teller typed on her computer. The screen reflected blue light across her face. She scrolled through numbers that moved too fast for Evelyn to follow. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Carter." The words came out practiced. "Professional. There haven't been any deposits besides your Social Security in 8 months." The sentence landed like a verdict. Final and absolute. Evelyn blinked slowly. "Could you check again? Maybe there's been a mistake." The teller's expression softened. She typed again, slower this time, more carefully. The result was the same. "No, ma'am. Just the Social Security on the 3rd of each month. Nothing else since last November." Evelyn nodded. Her throat felt dry. "Thank you for checking." On the ride home, she stared out the bus window at the desert landscape. Scrub brush stretched toward distant mountains. The sky was the color of old denim, faded from years of sun. She thought about the meal she had skipped. The electric heater she refused to turn on last winter, even when her breath made clouds in the kitchen. If $5,000 existed, she would have felt it. In the warmth of her house, in the fullness of her pantry. Back home, she spread her handwritten budget notebooks across the kitchen table. They covered every month since her husband died. Page after page of careful entries in blue ink. Blood pressure medication, $12. Electric bill, $29. Soup from the dollar store, $4. Bus fare to church, $2. She flipped through month after month. Her finger traced each line. Every number was in its place. Every date was exact. Every expense was accounted for. She had been a librarian for 43 years. Numbers and records were her world. Books were checked in and checked out. Fines were calculated to the penny. If she had received $5,000, it would be written on these pages. The absence became its own kind of proof. She closed the notebook and looked around her kitchen. The silence felt heavy, different than the comfortable quiet she was used to. That evening, she sat at her table again. The lamp overhead cast yellow light across the pages. She picked up her pen and began to write. "I remember," she wrote carefully. "I always remember." The line wasn't just about money. It was about staying up with a sick child when fever broke at 3 in the morning. It was about working double shifts at the library to pay for school supplies. It was about planning a funeral alone, counting every flower and every prayer. Memory was the one thing she had never lost. Not when her knees got stiff. Not when her eyes needed stronger glasses. Not when the world got faster around her. The next Sunday, she attended the church food distribution. She watched other seniors quietly accept boxes of canned goods. Their faces showed the same careful politeness she recognized in herself. The same practiced gratitude for help they shouldn't have needed. Mrs. Rodriguez from 2 streets over. Mr. Patterson, who used to fix cars behind the auto parts store. Faces she had known for decades, all lined up for charity they had never expected to need. How many of them, she wondered, had been told they were just forgetting when something felt wrong? How many had been made to doubt their own memories? A volunteer noticed her troubled expression. Sarah, a young mother from the congregation, approached with a concerned smile. "You okay, Miss Evelyn?" she asked softly. Evelyn forced a smile and nodded. "Just balancing my books," she replied. Inside, something had shifted. The confusion of yesterday was gone. In its place was a cold, steady certainty that felt almost like relief. The truth was always simpler than the lie. That night, she opened her notebook to a new page. The words came easier now. "This is not a misunderstanding," she wrote. "This is a choice someone made." She stared at the sentence for a long time. For the first time since Mother's Day, The anger didn't scare her. It steadied her. It gave her something to do with her hands and her time and her careful librarian mind. Outside her window, the desert was dark and quiet. But inside, something had begun to burn. Not hot and destructive, but warm and constant. Like a light left on for someone who was finally coming home. She closed the notebook and prepared for bed. Tomorrow she would start making phone calls. Tomorrow she would ask questions that deserved answers. Tonight she would sleep better than she had in months. Monday morning, Evelyn called the number printed on Michael's business card. She had saved it in her address book for 3 years, never having a reason to use it. The card was slightly bent from being moved between kitchen drawers. Horizon Healthcare Solutions, a receptionist answered. Her voice was young and efficient. I need to speak to someone about money, Evelyn said. The words felt strange in her mouth. About transfers. My son works there. The line went quiet for a moment. Then the woman asked for Michael's full name and department. After several clicks and a brief hold, Evelyn was connected to someone new. This is Rob Hastings, Chief Financial Officer, a man's voice said. He sounded middle-aged. Careful. How can I help you, Mrs. Carter? Something in his tone made her feel less foolish. Like her questions mattered. My son set up payments to me, she explained slowly. But I don't think I'm getting them. Could you check where the money goes? Rob asked for her account information. She could hear him typing on his computer. The sound reminded her of library checkout systems from years past. Mrs. Carter, he said after a long pause. His chair creaked as he leaned forward. The funds left Michael's corporate account every month. But the account number they're going to, it's not the one you just gave me. The words hit her like cold water. What does that mean? It means someone opened another account using your name. Would you mind coming to our office? I think you need to see this in person. An hour later, Evelyn sat in Rob's downtown office. The building was taller than any she had ever been inside. Through his window, the city looked small and distant. Rob spread printed statements across his desk. The papers were covered with numbers and account details that made her head spin. But one thing was clear: signatures that were supposed to be hers, but weren't. Someone forged your signature, Rob said quietly. Multiple times. This is identity theft. The words felt like a foreign language. Identity theft. Something that happened to other people. People who use computers and credit cards carelessly. Not retired librarians who paid cash for everything. Rob recommended a lawyer. Angela Moore, who specialized in cases like this. Elder financial abuse, he called it. Another phrase that didn't belong in her world. She's helped other families, Rob said. People who've been through exactly what you're going through. That afternoon in Angela's office, Evelyn felt smaller than usual. The law books on the shelves reached toward a ceiling she couldn't see. Everything smelled of leather and serious decisions. Angela listened without interrupting. Her notepad filled with careful handwriting while Evelyn explained about Mother's Day, about the bank, about Vanessa's certainty and Michael's relief. When Evelyn finished, Angela set down her pen. Mrs. Carter, what's happening to you is a crime. You're not the first person to sit in that chair with this story. But even as help arrived, resistance began. That evening, Michael called. His voice was different. Colder. Mom, I heard you went to my office today. And to some lawyer, he sounded tired. Annoyed. Vanessa's really upset. She says you're accusing her of stealing. I'm not accusing, Evelyn said carefully. I'm asking questions. Well, your questions are causing problems. Vanessa's crying. She feels like you don't trust her after everything she's done for you. The conversation continued for 20 minutes. Michael's voice grew more distant with each exchange. He used words like misunderstanding and confusion and getting worked up over nothing. Maybe you should talk to Dr. Phillips about this, he suggested finally. Dr. Phillips was her family doctor. The suggestion felt like a slap. When she hung up, the house seemed quieter than usual. The walls felt thinner, like they couldn't protect her from what was coming. The next morning, Vanessa arrived unannounced. She knocked once and walked in, as she had done for years. But her smile was different now, sharper around the edges. Mother Evelyn, she said sweetly, Michael told me you've been having some confusion about money. That must be so scary for you. Vanessa sat down at the kitchen table without being invited. She arranged her purse and her phone like she was preparing for an important meeting. I think maybe it's time to talk about getting you some extra help. Someone to manage your finances. Make sure you don't get confused again. The words were wrapped in concern, but they felt like threats. Vanessa spoke about memory care facilities and power of attorney like she was discussing the weather. I've already talked to Michael about it, she continued. He agrees that you need more support. We're both just worried about you. Evelyn sat across from her own kitchen table, feeling like a stranger in her own home. She thought about the notebook upstairs, about the careful records she had kept for decades, about the bank statement that proved what she already knew. But doubt crept in anyway. The way Vanessa spoke with such confidence, the way Michael had sounded so certain. Maybe she was making mountains out of molehills. Maybe she really was just a confused old woman who couldn't keep track of her own money. That night, she called Angela's office and left a message. Her voice was smaller than it had been the day before. "Maybe I was wrong," she said to the voicemail. "Maybe I'm just confused. Maybe I should stop asking questions." She hung up before she could say anything else, before she could take the words back. The house felt colder that night. She sat at her kitchen table with her notebook open, but the pen wouldn't move. The certainty she had felt just days before seemed far away now, like something she had dreamed rather than lived. Outside, the desert wind rattled her windows. Inside, she felt more alone than she had since her husband's funeral. The difference was that this time, the loneliness felt like her own fault. She had asked questions that nobody wanted to hear. She had disturbed a peace that everyone else seemed content to keep. In the morning, she would decide whether to keep fighting or to accept that maybe some battles were too big for someone like her. Maybe some truths were too complicated for an old woman who just wanted to be left in peace. But tonight, she sat in her kitchen surrounded by shadows, wondering if the courage she had found would be strong enough to carry her through whatever came next. The desert was dark and silent outside her window. For the first time in weeks, that silence didn't feel like comfort. It felt like abandonment. Wednesday morning brought news that felt like another blow to the stomach. Angela's secretary called to say that Vanessa had contacted their office directly. She was threatening to file a complaint about harassment and demanding that all legal actions stop immediately. She claims Mrs. Carter is having memory issues, the secretary explained gently. She's provided what she says is medical documentation about cognitive decline. Evelyn stared at the phone in her hand. Medical documentation? She hadn't seen a doctor for anything beyond blood pressure checks in 2 years. That afternoon, Dr. Phillips' office called to schedule an urgent appointment. Michael had requested a full cognitive evaluation. The appointment was already booked for Friday morning. Someone had taken the liberty of arranging her life without asking her permission. Thursday evening, Evelyn sat alone in her kitchen when another knock came at the door. This time it wasn't just Michael and Vanessa. Pastor Cole stood behind them, his expression apologetic but determined. "Mrs. Carter," he said softly, "your family asked me to come. They're concerned about you." They arranged themselves around her kitchen table like a tribunal. Michael in his press shirt and expensive watch, Vanessa with her phone recording everything for documentation, Pastor Cole with his Bible and his uncomfortable silence. "Mom," Michael began. His voice carried the patience of someone explaining something simple to someone slow. "We need to talk about reality here." Vanessa leaned forward with her most caring expression. "Mother Evelyn, we know you're struggling. It's okay. Memory problems happen to everyone our age." "Your age?" Evelyn's voice came out sharper than she intended. "You know what I mean," Vanessa continued smoothly. "Older people. Sometimes the mind plays tricks. Makes us think things that aren't true." Michael nodded along. "The lawyer you called. She's known for taking advantage of confused seniors. She files frivolous lawsuits to get money from families." "That's not what happened," Evelyn said quietly. "Mom." Michael's tone grew firmer. "You accused my wife of stealing $40,000. Vanessa, who brings you groceries, who checks on you every week, who's been nothing but generous." Pastor Cole shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mrs. Carter, perhaps there's been some misunderstanding that we could resolve through prayer and family discussion." The room felt smaller with each word they spoke. Their certainty filled the air like smoke, making it hard for her to breathe clearly. Vanessa pulled out a folder of papers. "Bank statements," she explained. "Proof of all the money that had been properly delivered to Evelyn's account." The numbers danced across the pages in neat rows. Official-looking stamps and signatures covered every document. "See?" Vanessa's voice was gentle but triumphant. "Everything is right here. Maybe you forgot to check your statements. Maybe you've been looking at the wrong account." Evelyn stared at the papers. The signatures looked almost like hers. Almost, but close enough to make her doubt what she had seen with her own eyes just days before. "I don't understand," she whispered. "That's okay," Michael said. "We're going to help you understand. We're going to take care of everything from now on. No more confusion. No more stress." They left an hour later with promises to handle everything. Vanessa hugged her goodbye, whispering about how much easier life would be once Evelyn stopped worrying about things she didn't need to understand. Pastor Cole paused at the door. "Mrs. Carter, sometimes the Lord tests our faith through our family. Perhaps this is an opportunity to practice trust and forgiveness. When they were gone, Evelyn sat in her empty kitchen, surrounded by the papers they had left behind. The documents seemed to prove everything they claimed. Her own memory felt unreliable suddenly, a thing that couldn't be trusted. She had spent 43 years organizing information, cataloging facts, making sure every detail was in its proper place. But now, surrounded by official documents and witness statements, she felt like a child who had gotten lost in her own library. That night, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling. The fan overhead moved in slow circles, creating shadows that shifted and changed like the doubts in her mind. Maybe Michael was right. Maybe she was just a confused old woman making trouble where none existed. Maybe Vanessa really had been helping all along. Maybe the bank teller had made a mistake. Maybe Angela was just another person trying to profit from an old woman's confusion. The thoughts circled in her head until dawn. By morning, she had almost convinced herself that everything her family said was true. Friday arrived gray and cold. Dr. Phillips' office smelled of disinfectant and old magazines. Evelyn sat in the waiting room surrounded by people younger than herself, all tapping on phones and checking appointments they controlled. When her name was called, she followed the nurse down a hallway lined with medical charts and reminder posters about flu shots and cancer screenings. Everything felt clinical, impersonal, like she was a problem to be diagnosed rather than a person to be heard. Dr. Phillips had known her for 15 years. He had treated her husband's diabetes and her own blood pressure. But today he looked at her differently, like she was a case study rather than a neighbor. The cognitive test felt like a humiliation designed by committee, counting backwards from 100 by sevens, drawing clock faces, remembering lists of random words that had no connection to anything meaningful in her life. Mrs. Carter, Dr. Phillips said when the testing was finished, your son is very concerned about recent changes in your behavior, memory issues, confusion about financial matters. She tried to explain about the bank statements and the forged signatures, but the words came out jumbled, defensive, like the complaints of someone who couldn't accept reality. Sometimes as we age, Dr. Phillips continued gently, our judgment becomes less reliable. We might misinterpret situations, make accusations based on incomplete information. He recommended medication for anxiety, counseling for adjustment issues, a social worker to help with financial management and decision-making support. On the bus ride home, Evelyn clutched the prescription bottle in her purse. The label read, for agitation and confusion in elderly patients. She felt like she was carrying proof of her own inadequacy. That evening, she sat alone in her living room. The lamp beside her chair cast yellow light across the medical paperwork scattered on the coffee table. Recommendations for assisted living facilities, pamphlets about power of attorney, information about memory care services. Her family had been busy while she was taking tests. They had already begun planning her future without her input. She thought about the notebook upstairs, about the careful records she had kept, about the certainty she had felt just a week ago. All of it seemed distant now, like memories from someone else's life. The phone rang. Angela's voice was kind but professional. Mrs. Carter, I understand you've decided not to pursue this matter further. If that's your choice, I respect it. But I want you to know that the evidence we discussed is still valid. Your instincts were correct. After she hung up, Evelyn sat in her dark living room for a long time. The house creaked around her like old bones settling into uncomfortable positions. Outside, the desert wind carried the scent of sage and distant rain. She had two choices. Accept the diagnosis that made her family comfortable. Take the medication that would make her easier to manage. Let other people make decisions about money and housing and medical care. Or trust the part of herself that had cataloged books and balanced budgets and raised a child without making mistakes that mattered. The notebook was still upstairs. Her handwriting was still clear and accurate. The bank teller's words still rang in her memory like a bell that couldn't be unrung. Slowly, Evelyn stood up from her chair. She walked to the kitchen and turned on the overhead light. The bulb flickered once, then held steady. She climbed the stairs to her bedroom and retrieved her notebook. Back in the kitchen, she sat at the table and opened to a fresh page. They want me to believe I'm broken, she wrote in careful letters. But broken things don't keep perfect records for 43 years. The words looked small on the wide page, but they felt solid, true in a way that medical tests and family meetings couldn't touch. She wrote until her hand cramped. Not about money or lawyers or cognitive tests, about the life she had built with careful attention to detail, about the trust she had earned through decades of competence and care. When she finished, she closed the notebook and looked around her kitchen. The same chipped sugar jar, the same wobbly table, the same stack of bills that never seemed to get smaller. But something had changed in the space between doubt and certainty. Something had hardened into determination. Tomorrow she would call Angela back. She would explain that the old woman who took cognitive tests was just one version of herself. The librarian who had never lost a book or missed a decimal point was another version entirely. She would choose which version to be. The desert outside her window was dark and quiet. But inside her kitchen, under the flickering light, something had awakened that felt stronger than fear. Stronger than the need to be liked or understood or comfortable. It felt like the truth. And the truth she remembered was something she had always been good at organizing. Saturday morning brought silence that made memories louder than the present. Evelyn sat at her kitchen table, staring at the worn blue notebook that had guided her through decades of careful bookkeeping. She had bought this notebook in 1987 when Michael was 15 and James lost his construction job. 8 months of unemployment stretched between them and survival. The memory hit sharp. This same table covered with past due notices. Michael's shoes worn through from walking everywhere they couldn't afford to drive. Her hands sorting his school clothes, deciding what could be patched. The notebook had been her anchor. Every dollar accounted for with precision. Milk $2.89, bread $0.99, total $5.37, remaining $12.63. James wanted to hide the struggle from Michael, but Evelyn knew lies made everything harder. She remembered sitting Michael down here on a November night. His homework spread between bills and the borrowed calculator. "Son, we need to talk about Christmas." Michael's face went still when she explained about layoffs and empty accounts. But instead of complaining, he surprised her. "What if I got a job after school?" 15 years old and understanding that dignity meant contributing solutions, not problems. He found work at the grocery store, bagging items for $15 daily that felt like fortune when every dollar had purpose. Christmas brought no tree, no gifts. But Michael carried home day-old donuts from the bakery, free from a manager who understood families counting pennies. They sat eating stale donuts and laughing. James found work 2 weeks later. Crisis passed like weather, leaving them stronger. Michael kept the job even after necessity faded. Learning work carried dignity regardless of pay. That was the son she raised. The boy who understood money's weight and honesty's value. Who promised her a big house because he remembered counting change for milk. Where had that boy gone? She stared around her kitchen, trying to see it through remembered Michael's eyes. The one who learned bank statements before driving, that Michael would have noticed when money stopped arriving, would have checked statements himself instead of trusting others. Success made him comfortable with ignorance. Wealth taught him to ignore things that once kept families honest. The phone rang. Michael's number appeared. "Mom, did you take Dr. Phillips' medication?" She glanced at the unopened bottle. "I'm feeling clear." "Good. Vanessa and I should handle your finances directly. Until you're more stable." "Michael, remember Christmas when you were 15? Why bring up old stuff?" "The donuts. When we couldn't afford a tree. That was different. Things are complicated now." "Are they? Or have you gotten comfortable not paying attention?" Silence stretched. She heard him breathing, remembering what he'd learned to forget. When he hung up, Evelyn felt clarity settle like morning light. She wasn't fighting for money. She was fighting for the son who once helped count grocery change here. Who understood why honesty mattered more than convenience. She opened her notebook. This time she didn't write about statements or documents. She wrote about donuts and dignity. About being poor in money versus poor in character. She wrote about raising a good son who forgot what goodness looked like when inconvenient. Outside, the desert brightened. Soon she would call Angela back. Soon she would restart the fight everyone wanted abandoned. But first she would remember who she was before anyone tried redefining her. A mother who raised a good son. A woman who survived hardship with dignity. A person whose memory was her most valuable possession. No one, not even family, could steal that. The notebook closed with a whisper. The sound of decisions made and battles chosen. The sound of a woman who counted pennies and raised sons for 43 years, preparing to prove age meant experience, not incompetence. The fight would continue on her terms, with her truth, in her careful handwriting. Monday morning, Angela's voice on the phone carried a different energy. Sharp and focused like a blade finding its target. "Mrs. Carter, we have a break in your case. Rob from Michael's company found something interesting in Vanessa's employment records." An hour later, Evelyn sat in Angela's office as Rob spread new documents across the conference table. His expression was grim but satisfied, like an accountant who had finally balanced a stubborn ledger. Vanessa never just opened a fake account in your name, Rob explained. She applied for a job at our company 6 months before she married Michael. Used your social security number on her application. The papers showed employment forms with Evelyn's personal information, but Vanessa's photograph. A credit check run in Evelyn's name to verify financial responsibility for a position handling insurance claims. She's been building a false identity using your information for 3 years, Angela said quietly. This goes far beyond stealing monthly payments. Rob pulled out more documents, credit card applications, a car loan, even a small business license for a social media consulting company, all filed under Evelyn Carter's name and social security number. Every time she got denied for something under her own credit, she used yours, he continued. Your perfect payment history, your clean record. She turned your reputation into her personal ATM. Evelyn stared at the papers. Her own name appeared dozens of times next to debts she had never seen and purchases she could never afford. Designer handbags charged to cards she had never applied for. Spa treatments billed to accounts she had never opened. How much? And she asked quietly. $47,000 in unauthorized charges. But the identity theft itself carries felony charges, regardless of the amount. Angela leaned forward. Mrs. Carter, we need to discuss strategy. This level of evidence changes everything. But I want you to understand that family cases like this can get very ugly very quickly. The plan was simple. Angela would contact the district attorney's office while Rob documented every fraudulent transaction. Meanwhile, Evelyn would do the hardest part. She would call Michael and ask him to come over for dinner. One last time. Don't mention the new evidence, Angela advised. Let them think you're backing down. Sometimes the best trap is the one that looks like surrender. That afternoon, Evelyn called Michael's office. Her voice was smaller than usual, defeated in a way that felt like acting, but also like prophecy. Son, could you and Vanessa come for dinner Friday? I've been thinking about what you said, about letting you handle things. Michael's relief was audible through the phone. Of course, Mom. That sounds perfect. Vanessa will be so happy to hear you're feeling better about everything. Friday evening, Evelyn prepared green chili stew and cornbread, the same meal she had cooked the night everything started to unravel. But this time she wasn't cooking out of love or tradition. She was preparing bait. Michael arrived first, carrying flowers and wearing the expression of someone who believed a difficult conversation was behind them. Vanessa followed in designer jeans and a sweater that cost more than Evelyn's monthly grocery budget. They sat around the familiar table as steam rose from bowls of stew. Vanessa dominated the conversation with stories about her latest influencer collaborations and upcoming trips to Los Angeles for business meetings. I'm just so grateful this whole misunderstanding is behind us, Vanessa said, reaching across to pat Evelyn's hand. Family is everything, isn't it? Evelyn smiled and nodded, playing the part of the confused elderly woman who had finally accepted her place. She asked gentle questions about Vanessa's work, her travels, her expensive tastes. Your business must be doing very well, Evelyn observed mildly. Social media consulting pays so much better than I realized. Vanessa's laugh was bright and careless. Oh, it's not really a business yet. More of a side hustle. Michael supports most of our lifestyle, obviously. I just do this for fun. Of course, Evelyn said. Though I saw some paperwork that mentioned Carter Social Solutions. Is that your company? Vanessa's fork paused halfway to her mouth. I'm not sure what you mean. Maybe I'm confused again. Evelyn continued gently. But didn't you register a business license under that name? Using my address here as the mailing location? The silence that followed was different from the comfortable quiet of family dinner. It was the silence of predators suddenly realizing they were surrounded. Michael looked between his wife and his mother with growing confusion. Vanessa, what is she talking about? Before Vanessa could answer, the doorbell rang. Evelyn excused herself and returned with Angela and Rob, both carrying folders thick with documentation. I'm sorry to interrupt dinner, Angela said politely, but we need to discuss some new developments in Mrs. Carter's case. Rob began laying papers across the dinner table, covering the remains of the home-cooked meal with evidence of systematic fraud. Bank statements showing transfers to accounts Evelyn had never opened. Credit applications bearing her signature in handwriting that clearly wasn't hers. These documents show a pattern of identity theft spanning 3 years, Angela explained to Michael. Your wife has been using your mother's personal information to obtain credit, register businesses, and make purchases totaling nearly $50,000. Michael's face went through several changes of expression. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then to something harder and colder. Vanessa, he said quietly, tell me this isn't true. Vanessa's composure cracked like ice under sudden pressure. The polished influencer facade fell away, revealing something desperate underneath. "It's not what it looks like," she said quickly. "I was protecting her credit, making sure she had good standing for when she needed care later. It was all for her benefit." "These charges are for spa treatments in Santa Fe," Rob said, pointing to specific line items. "Designer handbags from Nordstrom. A lease payment on a Lexus SUV. Which part of that benefits Mrs. Carter?" "I needed those things for my work," Vanessa protested, "for maintaining the image that brings in clients. The money all goes to supporting this family." Michael stood up from the table slowly. "What clients, Vanessa? What actual income have you brought in?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a fire no one wanted to acknowledge. Vanessa's mouth opened and closed without producing words that could rebuild the lies now scattered across the dinner table like broken dishes. "The business exists," she said finally. "I have meetings. I have opportunities. I just needed better credit to get started properly. Using my mother's identity," Michael said. His voice was flat now, drained of the warmth that had characterized their marriage. "Stealing from the woman who raised me to fund your lifestyle while she counted pennies for soup." Evelyn watched her son's face as the full scope of the betrayal became clear to him. This wasn't confusion or memory problems or family misunderstandings. This was calculated theft from the person he had promised to protect. Angela placed a final document on the table. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you're served with a summons for identity theft, fraud, and elder financial exploitation. You need to appear in court next Friday at 9 a.m. Vanessa stared at the legal papers as if they were written in a language she couldn't understand. Then she looked around the table at faces that no longer offered sympathy or protection. "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice had lost its confident edge. "She's an old woman who gets confused. You can't believe her over me." "We don't have to believe anyone," Rob replied calmly. "The paper trail speaks for itself." As Angela and Rob gathered their documents and prepared to leave, Vanessa made one last desperate attempt to control the narrative. "Michael, you can't let them do this to me. To us? Think about what this will do to your reputation. Your business." Michael looked at his wife as if seeing her clearly for the first time. "My reputation," he said slowly, "was built on the foundation my mother gave me. Honesty, hard work, caring for family instead of using them." He turned to Evelyn. "Mom, I'm sorry. I should have seen this. I should have protected you instead of letting her convince me you were the problem." Evelyn reached across the table and touched her son's hand. "You see it now," she said simply. "That's what matters." After everyone left, Evelyn sat alone in her kitchen, surrounded by the debris of a meal that had ended a marriage and begun a reckoning. The same chipped sugar jar sat on the same wobbly table. But everything else had changed. She opened her notebook and wrote a single line. The truth walks slowly, but it arrived exactly when it was supposed to. Outside her window, the New Mexico desert stretched toward distant mountains under a sky full of stars. Inside her small house, Justice felt as close as her own careful handwriting on familiar pages. The fight wasn't over yet. There would be court dates and legal proceedings and family relationships to rebuild. But tonight, for the first time in months, she felt like herself again. A woman who had raised an honest son and lived an honest life. A woman whose memory and whose truth had proved stronger than lies wrapped in expensive clothes and pretty words. 3 weeks later, the Bernalillo County Courthouse smelled of cleaning solution and old paper. Evelyn clutched her notebook instead of a purse as she climbed the stone steps. It felt like armor against whatever waited inside. The district attorney had moved quickly. Vanessa faced charges of identity theft, elder financial exploitation, and fraud. Her expensive lawyer called it a family misunderstanding blown out of proportion. But the paper trail told a different story. In the courthouse hallway, Evelyn waited on a wooden bench that reminded her of church pews. Michael sat 3 seats away, close enough to acknowledge her presence, but far enough to respect the distance that had grown between them. He wore a different suit than usual, darker, more serious, like he was attending a funeral for the life he thought he had built. "Mom," he said quietly, "I want you to know that whatever happens today, I'm proud of you for fighting this." Evelyn nodded but didn't reply. Pride felt premature. Justice was still a possibility, not a guarantee. When their names were called, they filed into a courtroom that looked smaller and more ordinary than television had led her to expect. The judge was a middle-aged woman with graying hair and reading glasses that made her look like a librarian. Evelyn found that comforting. Vanessa sat at the defendant's table in a conservative navy dress that couldn't disguise the desperation in her posture. Her lawyer was younger than Michael, with perfectly styled hair and a briefcase that probably cost more than Evelyn's monthly budget. The prosecution laid out the evidence methodically. Bank statements showing unauthorized transfers, credit applications with forged signatures, business licenses filed under false pretenses. Each document was entered into evidence like books being cataloged in a systematic collection. Rob testified about the discovery process, how routine compliance checks had revealed the duplicate accounts and fraudulent applications. His voice was steady and professional, turning betrayal into data points and emotional devastation into accounting irregularities. Angela presented the timeline of theft. $47,000 diverted over 36 months. Credit cards maxed out for luxury purchases, while an elderly woman counted pennies for groceries. The math was simple enough for anyone to understand. When Vanessa took the stand, her lawyer tried to paint her as a well-meaning daughter-in-law overwhelmed by caretaking responsibilities. She dabbed at her eyes with tissues and spoke about how difficult it was to manage an aging family member's confusion. "I was trying to protect her," Vanessa said, voice breaking in what looked like practiced emotion. "She would forget things. Leave the stove on. I was scared she would hurt herself if I didn't step in." But cross-examination revealed the flaws in her story. Angela asked pointed questions about spa treatments and designer handbags. How did a Lexus SUV protect an elderly woman from leaving the stove on? How did weekend trips to Los Angeles prevent cognitive decline? You used Mrs. Carter's social security number on a job application 6 months before you married her son, Angela continued. How does that timeline fit with your caregiving concerns? Vanessa's composure cracked like ice under pressure. That was different. I needed better credit for the wedding expenses. Whose credit, yours or Mrs. Carter's? The question hung in the courtroom air like smoke that couldn't be cleared away. Michael testified reluctantly, admitting he had never verified where his monthly transfers actually went. His voice was flat with shame as he described trusting his wife to handle details he should have managed himself. "I work in healthcare finance," he said, looking directly at the judge. "I tell patients to read every line of their medical bills, but I never check my own mother's bank statements." When Evelyn took the stand, she didn't cry or perform emotional devastation. She simply told the truth in the same careful voice she had used to read story time at the library for 4 decades. "Your Honor, I may be 67 years old, but my mind is still a good librarian. I know where every book belongs. I know where every dollar should have gone." She explained about the notebook, about 43 years of balanced budgets and careful records, about the certainty that comes from a lifetime of paying attention to details that matter. "I don't need anyone to manage my confusion," she continued. "I need someone to explain why my trust was used as a business plan." The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. $47,000 in restitution. Removal of all financial authority from Vanessa regarding Evelyn's affairs. Closure of all fraudulent accounts. 18 months of probation and community service. "Mrs. Rodriguez," the judge said sternly, "elder financial exploitation is a serious crime that destroys families and devastates vulnerable citizens. Your actions were calculated, systematic, and cruel." Vanessa covered her face as the gavel fell. Michael stared at his hands like they belonged to someone else. Outside the courthouse, autumn wind scattered dead leaves across the parking lot. Evelyn stood on the steps breathing air that tasted different than it had that morning. Cleaner somehow. Like rain after a long drought. Michael approached slowly, hands in his pockets, like a boy who had broken something valuable and wasn't sure how to apologize. "Mom," he said, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I chose comfort over truth. I chose her word over yours." Evelyn looked at her son, really looked at him, past the expensive suit and the shame and the man he had become. She tried to see the 15-year-old who had brought home day-old donuts and promises to buy her a big house someday. "Trust isn't foolish, Michael," she said finally. "But some people are. You have to decide which one you'll be going forward." It wasn't forgiveness exactly, but it wasn't condemnation either. It was an open door with conditions attached, a bridge that could be rebuilt if he was willing to do the work. Michael nodded slowly. "What can I do? How do I start making this right?" "You start by learning to check the bank statements yourself," Evelyn replied. "You start by remembering that paying attention to details isn't paranoia. It's love." That evening, Evelyn sat at her kitchen table writing in her notebook. The restitution money would arrive within 30 days. Vanessa would be out of their lives within a week, moving back to Los Angeles where she claimed to have real opportunities waiting. The numbers in her bank account weren't what mattered most. What mattered was the restoration of something that couldn't be measured in dollars. The confirmation that her memory was reliable, her instincts were sound. Her voice deserved to be heard and believed. She wrote until her hand cramped, not about money or legal victories, but about the difference between justice and revenge. Justice felt clean. It restored balance without requiring hatred. It fixed what was broken without breaking the people who had done the breaking. Michael had texted twice since leaving the courthouse. Short messages asking if she needed anything, if she wanted company, if there was anything he could do to start rebuilding what had been damaged. She hadn't responded yet. Not because she was angry, but because some conversations needed to happen in person. At kitchen tables where honesty had room to breathe and grow. Tomorrow she would invite him over for green chili stew. They would sit at the same wobbly table where everything had started to unravel. But this time, they would talk about bank statements and trust and the difference between loving someone and enabling them to hurt you. Tonight, though, she would sit quietly with the satisfaction of a battle fought and won. A truth defended and validated. A voice that had been heard above the noise of people who confused loudness with correctness. The desert outside her window was dark and vast under a canopy of stars. Inside her small house, justice felt as close as her own careful handwriting on familiar pages. As reliable as numbers that always added up correctly when she took the time to check them twice. The fight was over. The healing could begin. 1 year later, the New Mexico Senior Justice Council held its annual awards ceremony in a modest civic center on Central Avenue. Folding chairs filled the hall with gray hair, walking canes, and more smartphones than anyone had expected from their generation. Evelyn sat near the front wearing the same church blouse, carefully mended where the missing button used to be. Michael straightened the collar like he used to fix his tie before school pictures. He looked more tired now, but more real. Like someone who had learned the difference between success and achievement. The past 12 months had moved like seasons changing. Slow at first, then faster as healing found its rhythm. Michael had kept his promise about learning to check bank statements. Every month, he brought his laptop to Evelyn's kitchen table and walked through every transaction, every transfer, every automatic payment. Not because he didn't trust her, but because attention had become his way of showing love. Vanessa had disappeared into Los Angeles like smoke dispersing in desert wind. Divorce papers arrived by certified mail 3 months after the court ruling. No forwarding address, no explanation, just legal documents that made official what had already ended. Michael rented a small apartment near the hospital district, trading luxury for proximity to the mother he was learning to see clearly again. He stopped by twice a week with groceries and conversation that felt less like obligation and more like choice. But the biggest change had been Evelyn's discovery of purpose beyond her own healing. Pastor Cole had mentioned her situation to other congregations around Albuquerque. Within 6 months, Evelyn found herself fielding phone calls from seniors who recognized their own stories in hers. An 80-year-old widower whose grandson used his credit cards. A retired teacher whose daughter had stolen her pension. Stories that followed the same script of trust, betrayed, and truth questioned. She started meeting them for coffee at the diner near the church. Nothing formal, just listening, sharing resources, helping them find legal aid when they needed it, reminding them that confusion wasn't the same as incompetence. When her name was called at the awards ceremony, the applause felt both too loud and not loud enough for all the unseen battles it represented. Evelyn Carter, founder of the Senior Voices Network. She walked to the podium slowly, not from age, but from the weight of representing something larger than her own experience. Behind her sat Michael, tears bright in his eyes. Around her sat hundreds of people who understood that dignity wasn't about never falling down. It was about getting back up with help from people who believed you deserved to stand. At the microphone, she looked out over the crowd. Social workers and nurses, judges and lawyers, seniors who had survived their own versions of her story, adult children who were learning the difference between protecting their parents and patronizing them. A year ago, she began, someone told me I was just a confused old woman who couldn't be trusted with her own memories. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Recognition and sympathy from people who had heard similar words in their own families. Today, I want to tell you something I've learned. Age doesn't mean your mind is broken. It means you've had more time to practice telling the difference between truth and convenience. The applause started slowly, then built like rain after drought. If someone tells you that you're too old to understand your own life, ask yourself this: who benefits from your confusion? Who profits from your silence? She talked briefly about the Senior Voices Network, about the importance of listening to people whose experience deserved respect rather than dismissal, about the difference between helping someone and taking over their life. We are not problems to be managed, she concluded. We are people with stories that matter. And sometimes those stories can help other people write better endings to their own. After the ceremony, a woman in her 70s approached with a folder of bank statements. My daughter says I'm just confused about these charges, she whispered. But something feels wrong. Evelyn smiled sadly but warmly. Come to coffee on Tuesday. We meet at the diner on 4th Street at 10. We'll look together. The drive home took them through neighborhoods Evelyn rarely visited anymore. Michael pointed out changes in the city. New businesses, closed restaurants, the constant evolution that made every homecoming slightly different than memory expected. Mom, he said as they turned into her familiar driveway, I want to ask you something. She waited while he gathered courage for whatever came next. Would you consider letting me help you expand the senior voices thing? Not take it over, he added quickly. Just provide some resources. A real office, maybe. A website. Evelyn studied her son's face. The offer felt genuine, free from the controlling undertones that had characterized his help in the past. Why? She asked simply. Because I've learned something this year too, he replied. Success isn't about how much money you make. It's about how many people are better off because you existed. That evening, they sat at her kitchen table with reheated green chili stew and cornbread that crumbled when they touched it. The same meal, the same wobbly table, the same chipped sugar jar. But the conversation was different now. Honest in ways that felt both new and familiar. Michael asked about her work with other seniors. She asked about his efforts to rebuild relationships with the few friends who had remained loyal through his divorce. They talked about forgiveness as a process rather than a moment. About trust as something that could be regained through consistent actions rather than apologies. When he left that night, Evelyn stood on her porch watching his taillights disappear down the street. The desert air was cool against her face, carrying the scent of sage and distant rain. Inside, she opened her notebook to a fresh page. The ritual had become less about recording expenses and more about capturing lessons that felt too important to trust to memory alone. I didn't lose anything this year, she wrote in careful letters. I simply discovered what I had been carrying all along. She thought about the awards sitting on her kitchen counter, about the seniors who would call tomorrow asking for help with their own financial mysteries, about Michael learning to show love through attention instead of assumption. Some people think getting older means becoming invisible, she continued writing, but maybe it just means learning to see more clearly. The words looked small on the wide page, but they felt large enough to fill the house around her. Large enough to carry into tomorrow and the day after that. Large enough to share with other people who needed reminding that their voices still mattered. Outside her window, the New Mexico desert stretched toward distant mountains under a sky full of stars. Inside her small house, hope felt as close as her own careful handwriting on familiar pages. The story wasn't over, but she was no longer afraid of the chapters to come. She closed the notebook and prepared for bed, thinking about Tuesday morning. Coffee and the woman with the bank statements who had whispered about feeling confused. Tomorrow she would listen. She would help. She would remind another person that confusion wasn't the enemy. Silence was, and silence, she had learned, was something she was very good at breaking.